How's it going? I'm Jim Zub. Nice to see all of you. Well, I'm not seeing any of you, but hopefully you're seeing me now here on the stream. Welcome, welcome. I hope you guys are doing well on this Saturday. And here in Toronto, there's actually really nice weather today. So we're just sort of easing through the day. It's been kind of nice. I'm going to go through for the next hour. I'm going to be talking about the comic book writing process. There is a live chat that is going. If you have specific questions, you can put them there. You might want to put in caps like question or something like that so that I can pick it up. I probably won't answer the questions necessarily in the moment unless it directly applies to what I'm covering there. I'm going to try and keep track of it. But obviously, I'm going through a bunch of examples and stuff here, and that's where my focal point is going to be. And drinking some water, apparently. All right. So I'm assuming people on this stream, you haven't written a comic before, or maybe you've done minimal amount of writing on that front. I'm going to talk about the entire kind of process, trying to talk about what's unique about comics as a medium, things that we can really do in comics and ways that we communicate that in our writing. The types of things that I've learned over the years, a lot of process stuff, a lot of stuff in terms of structure and pacing and things like that. Things that took me quite a while to kind of figure out. There are not a lot of books specifically on writing comics. And one of the things I found when I started out was just the act of analyzing other people's comics, looking at how they put their pages together. The few times I could get access to see what a script looked like was really valuable to me. And so if I'm able to impart something like that here, that's an ideal, that you get a glimpse at behind the curtain, how this stuff all works. I know there's a lot of preconceived notions that people have that particularly in modern comics, I think that the writer is in charge of a comic project. And that's really not the case. Comics are so unique in the way that it is a collaboration between the art team, the story and everything comes together. One person's script can be interpreted so many different ways by artists, and the amount of detail that people put into a script, sometimes they're very loose outlines, sometimes they're much more detailed kind of processes, and none of those are wrong as long as you're getting the kind of end result that you want. I've had projects where I have deep, constant collaboration with the art team and we're working through every page and panel together, and I've had other ones where I've essentially written the script not even knowing who the art team is going to be, handing it off and then seeing the end result with minimal input. And that's not ideal. That's not the way I like to work, but everything within that kind of spectrum. On any creative job, your job is to, deliver the goods, what you say you're going to do, obviously as good or better than you promise. But in addition to that, you're also trying to play to the strengths of what everyone else can do and fill in those gaps where needed. So what I'm going to step through here is kind of my thought process and then my writing process on starting off the Conan the Barbarian monthly series. So I believe issue 14 is now out. So Jason Aaron wrote the first 12 issues of the kind of return of Conan the Barbarian to the Marvel canon. And I've picked up with issue 13. And I'm the new monthly writer for the series moving forward. I've got a pretty big plan for the series stretched out over a bunch of issues as we move forward. And so this was really a lot of pressure in so many ways for me, in a good way. I absolutely love Conan the Barbarian. I've had the chance to write the character several times, but this is the flagship book, and this was the monthly ongoing. And so there's a lot of the good kind of stress, that professional stress you want to have, where you're digging in on a dream project and want to deliver your best. And so I went back and did a bunch of research. So even before I show you a bunch of examples, I think it's crucial to understand everyone's process is a little bit different. But for me, one of the things I find very valuable is dipping really deeply back into my favorite material. So the original Robert E. Howard stories, the prose, some of my favorite Roy Thomas comics, just, reading Jason's run, getting a feel and marinating myself in as much of it as possible. Now, research reading is different from just reading for fun. I find research reading is a more intensive kind of process. And I'm not just skimming through this stuff. I'm really looking with a very keen eye in terms of how stories are paced, what is grabbing me about them in terms of the art, in terms of the text. If there's particular passages of text or dialogue that I'm reading that strike me as being poignant or interesting, I'll write those down. I have like a little notebook as I read for research, and not because I'm going to copy them, but I just want to have them on hand because they feel evocative to me or they're striking some sort of a chord. If I have questions as I'm reading through my research material, stuff that doesn't make sense in terms of plot or characterizations or things that feel like they might be relevant to me later, place names and character names and events and stuff like that, I'll write those down bullet pointed in my research notes. And it sounds really dry, but you're building up a well of inspiration. When you're working on your own independent characters and create your own stuff, you have to generate a lot of, material to understand your characters and your world. And it's a lot more flexible in that sense because, you're making it up whole cloth. But here, these are established characters. Conan the Barbarian is one of the most famous characters in kind of sword and sorcery literature. I want to do it right. I want to understand and find out what speaks to me about the character. I'm not Robert E. Howard. I'm not Roy Thomas or any of these other writers, but I still want to plug into some of that inspirational material and get a feel for it and generate that excitement. And it's pretty easy to do with a character I've loved as long as Conan the Barbarian. But even still, not assuming anything, really kind of digging in immediately and grabbing hold of it as much as I can. From there, I start to thumbnail out, brainstorm ideas for story material. Now, again, with a character who has, in some cases, hundreds of stories like Conan, doing something, it's hard to create something that is wholly original, that has never been done before. But if I can even take one of these concepts and give it a twist, or if I can generate something that feels a little bit different or takes some other influences and tries to push and pull some of those things to put Conan into a situation that people maybe haven't seen before or haven't seen in a long time, at least, that can be potent. So I was looking at a kind of story where Conan would be at a particular age. I wanted him to be young. And the reason why is there's sort of three main eras of the character. You have Conan in his youth. He's kind of impetuous and troublemaking. He's more of a thief and a scavenger in some ways than the kind of warrior barbarian that we think of. In his prime, he's very much a capable warrior and soldier, eventually leader, and then he goes on to become the king by his own hand, King Conan, real legendary hero known across, the Hyborian age. But I like Conan in his youth, and the reason why, and I can write the character in all three eras, but Conan in his youth has a boisterousness and an impatience and intensity that I really like. He puts himself out into situations because he hasn't done everything before. He doesn't know what's around every corner, and he makes mistakes. Not that Conan in his prime doesn't make mistakes, but it would feel, when a character is that mature and has gone through that many battles, it can sort of box you in a little bit in terms of their capabilities as a veteran. And so I like a younger Conan who's willing to put himself out there and almost be foolish and naive in some respects and learn, like showing characters growing over the course of a story, that they are capable of changing over the course of a story, I think is really valuable. And so that was where I kind of planted my flag. I wanted to do a younger Conan and talk about some of those core themes of what I want to cover. So I wanted to put Conan in a situation that he hadn't been in before, or at least something that I hadn't seen really much of. And I wanted there to be something that Conan was pushing up against, that, putting a character just in a jungle or a desert is fine. Survival is a valid kind of story problem to overcome. But one of the things I thought could be cool is if he was up against some sort of system, like the classic kind of archetype of a Robert E. Howard kind of Conan story is like savagery versus civilization, and how Conan, works again, it is boxed in by laws or rules or systems, and he's breaking free of them or pushing through them or showing how they don't always have the answer, that civilization is not the end all and the be all, and that some of the most cruel things that people do is in the name of the law, in the name of religion, or whatever may have you. And so I had this idea about some sort of contest or some sort of game, some sort of death trap or things like this. And so I was pushing and pulling a bunch of different material that I thought could be cool, and started to come up with this idea for a story. Once you get that idea, they're free floating things that you're coming up with. You have to formalize it into a pitch. In this case, I'm putting together a summary of a story to give to my editor. And then there's two levels of editorial for something like Conan, because there's the Marvel end of things on a publishing front, and then there's Conan Properties, the people who run the Conan license. And both of them need to approve the story that I'm putting together. Clarity is really crucial. And keeping something summarized really well. I think a lot of people get the wrong idea that a pitch, I think some people who haven't done a lot of writing, they think you need to have a lot of material. You need to throw pages and pages, hundreds of pages at a publisher to prove to them you're really a writer. And the truth is your ability to communicate cleanly and quickly is more important than volume. Summarizing an idea, making it clear exactly what you're going for and why, is going to grab their attention. And you're not wasting their time. You're not overblowing it with too much prose. So I'm going to show you the outline. I'm not going to show you the entire outline, because it actually reveals the end of the story that we haven't got to yet. But I want to show you how I summarize kind of what this thing is going to be about, how I put a real button on what the themes of the story are, and use the kind of language that will hopefully excite the editor and the reader, as it filters down to them in the form of the story, with the kind of qualities that will be entertaining across the board, and use other things potentially for comparison as a shortcut to explain how this story is going to work. So what I'm going to do here, I share my screen, just getting used to all these tools at my disposal here. All right. Let's see how this works. Hopefully that works. There we go. So this is Into the Crucible. So I won't read everything out loud, but it says a 3-part story of deceit and danger for Conan the Barbarian. Even that subtitle tells you something as an editor. You immediately go, okay, there's going to be deceit, there's going to be danger. Like most Conan stories have those things, but putting a button on it, making it absolutely clear, this is what we're going for. There's a mood that I'm generating that I want the editor to understand. An innocuous festival deceives Conan, and he's recruited into a tournament set in the labyrinthian dungeon filled with deadly creatures and traps to provide amusement for a city ruled by corrupt debutantes. In order to survive, Conan will need to work with an inexperienced young warrior who speaks the local language, an honor-bound assassin, a mute holy warrior, and a shaman. But in the end, only one of them can emerge the victor, and vengeance will be found on the sharp edge of a Cimmerian sword. Okay? So right there, in essentially two pretty robust sentences, I've summarized the story. I've told you where this is taking place. I've told you what's kind of at stake. I'm using really descriptive language, and probably more kind of purple prose than I would with some of my other pitches, but that's Robert E. Howard in a nutshell, is these big poetic kind of things. And so for me, I want to kind of generate a little bit of that feeling. We scroll down a little bit further. It says here, Robert E. Howard was fascinated by the contrast of culture versus savagery, and the ways that people who had great wealth, power, or intelligence could justify immoral behavior, particularly against those they deemed as primitive or ignorant. Honor, loyalty, and truth comes from those with lower class peasant or laborer backgrounds, including Conan himself. Into the Crucible plays off this concept by opening with a joyous occasion and then unveiling the true depths of the city's depravity as they toy with the lives of warriors they cast down into a deadly tournament expressly built to entertain them. It's an earthy sword and sorcery take on stories like Battle Royale, The Hunger Games, The Running Man, or the Saw franchise, done with Hyborian flair. So here, in just under half a page, you kind of have all the ingredients. I could send that to my editor and get initial sign off if this was just a Marvel approval process. Because of Conan Properties, they need a more in-depth breakdown, beat by beat, kind of what's happening in each issue and how that's all going to work. And that's a good thing too. Having that structure can be really valuable to understand how this stuff works. But here in half a page, I have not wasted your time. I've given you all the ingredients, what's going to work in the story, the kind of cool imagery that I want to summon in your mind, and the feeling of what we're going to be going through, and that it means something. I think a lot of times when I'll say to someone, they'll pitch me a story idea, I'll say, what's it about? And what they'll do is they'll tell me plot. So they'll tell me this happens, then this happens, then this happens. That is a story, and there are a sequence of events that make up a story, but why we're seeing it is just as kind of important. So in this case, we are trying to showcase culture versus savagery, that this is a core theme of Conan the Barbarian and Robert E. Howard's storytelling. And I want to exemplify that in this particular story. This is our opening arc of my run, and I want to just like hit it, as hard as I can with something that I feel is intrinsic to Conan the Barbarian. And that was kind of the point. So not just, hey, we're going to do a cool dungeon and there's going to be a bunch of death traps, and like that visual imagery is great, but beneath it all, having something else we're trying to say, something more that we can put into the story to make it have lasting value, that people will remember it hopefully by the end, not just because of a cool visual, not just because of an action beat, but because we're saying something about humanity, or we're saying something about Conan the Barbarian in particular. And so that, is really important to me. And then we go through. So each chapter, I've got a series of paragraphs that break down what's happening in the issue. Not quite moment by moment, but major scene by major scene, figuring out how we open and how the issue is going to finish, and where the cliffhangers fall on each of these issues. It's a 3-part story, so we're going to have 2 cliffhangers. We're going to have one after part 1, one after part 2, with part 3 giving us some sort of summation and finish to this particular story. Don't worry about reading all this stuff. If you come back to the stream later, you could pause it and read it, but I'm going to go through and show you even more so how this works. So I do this for each of the issues, break it down into these paragraphs. Each one is about, I'd say maybe half a page to 2/3 of a page. But again, your word count's going to depend on how much detail is required, or how much explanation is needed to impart the story. If it's written well and it's summarized well, hopefully the editor is locked in and engaged. They want to see what's going on. And there's also a certain point where I can kind of montage elements of it, in a sense that if I say, a bunch of action happens, or these people fight, or we travel to a location, I don't have to tell you whether they're traveling by horse or if they're in the back of a wagon. That will get figured out in the script, or I can justify it later on. I don't have to tell you how many days it's going to take or something like that. That'll get figured out. Those kinds of minor details are not really going to be an issue. So don't feel like you have to over explain, but there has to be enough meat on the bone that someone can understand the story. Someone just had a question here in the chat. You mentioned that the end of this pitch spoils the story arc. Do you use the pitch to place all your cards on the table? Do you hold anything back? I don't hold anything back from my editors or from the property, Conan Properties. And the reason why is they have to approve the story as it goes. Sometimes in the summary, I'll have a bit of a teaser where I'll say like, and someone's the murderer or whatever. And then of course, in the actual outline, the plot will break it all down. Your job is to entertain the editor, but just the same thing with the artist as well. You need to explain everything. They have to have all the clues and all the material to understand it. If I'm doing a murder mystery, for example, and I need the artist to impart certain visual clues, I can't hold that back from them. I have to tell them, hey, so-and-so's got to be holding the murder weapon in a particular way, even if on the page that would be much more subtle. So a script reveals everything. The outline reveals everything. There's no mystery there because we're all in on the story. Our job is to surprise the reader and present it to them in a cool and exciting way, not to hold things back. I understand that impetus in the broader sense, but particularly if you're a new writer, you can't go into a pitch and say, and you won't believe the ending. A publisher and editor is going to be like, probably I will believe it because I've seen all this stuff before. If you have something genuinely amazing or a really cool character turn or a moment, it has to stand on its own and still be strong in the outline. That the editor could read it and go, oh yeah, that's going to be a big shock. That's going to be really cool. They've got to believe in it and back the idea in order for you to be able to carry it out. So you don't hold any of that stuff back for them. Okay, let's go to the next set. So I would send this outline, back and forth conversations, whether that's over email or jump on the phone or a Zoom call or whatever. And any bits get worked out. Sometimes scenes get changed or stuff gets moved, or we decide we need more material or less material, for this particular story. Any kind of story logic, major gaps, I may need to explain or fill in. But for the most part, if the outline is clear and hopefully it gets approved, then you go into this kind of story planning. Some writers can fly by the seat of their pants and they can just sit down and start scripting page 1 and go to the end of the scripts and then go back and make adjustments. That's not how I work. My background's originally in animation, and I think that had a real huge effect on how much story planning I do in animation, particularly hand-drawn animation, which is what my background's in. You have to storyboard out every camera shot, and you essentially pre-edit a film that every shot is worked out. They put a vocal track and a music track over top of those storyboards. And then like a patchwork quilt, you start animating each different bit to fit it all together. Because that way you're not wasting money and time. Animation is so time consuming and resource heavy. If you animate whole sequences and then you don't use them, you're wasting tons of time, tons of money, resources. It's crazy. And I feel kind of the same way about scripting. By the time I'm scripting, I kind of know what the story feels like. I'm filling in some of the visual details. I'm filling in dialogue and trying to make that as snappy and interesting as possible. But I already know all the big beats. I know how it's going to play out. And that's an important method for me anyways. So what I do is I do a pacing breakdown, which is sort of an intermediary step. And some writers do this, but not all of them. So let me show you what one of those looks like. It's really, really simple. Here it is. So this is it's just a notepad. So this is a text file. I literally have page numbers written down. So it's a 20-page issue. So I'm breaking down what the key points are on each page. So we open with celebration. Conan is drunk and happy. Then we do a 2-page spread of this, here's the title card and it's going to be real big and beautiful and visual. There's a strongman that during the celebration, we're setting up this kind of contest that Conan's going to be put in. There's a feat of strength. They end up fighting. There's a brawl that takes 3 pages. And then Conan's going to meet this kid who knows the local language. Conan is declared the people's champion. The sort of trick of the issue gets revealed here, that Conan's going to get dragged into this like a death contest that he wasn't prepared for. He tries to escape, but he fails. He lands in the pit. We're going to reveal the other contestants in a 2-page spread here. There's some sort of an announcement from the people running the tournament, so we get a sense of how cruel and decadent and awful they are. One of the contestants is going to immediately die, so we're like, oh man, this is what's at stake. Holy crap, people can die. And then Conan is going to flee, and we get some backstory on the Crucible. We're going to introduce our first kind of main set piece of the tournament, and this creature is going to attack. So already there's a lot going on here, but I have a feeling for pacing. I have a feeling for what's going to be happening on each page. Now, comics have one of the most unique storytelling methods in any medium, because much like editing with film, how you cut and where you cut makes a huge difference. With comics, we have panels to play with, but we also have the page turn, which is really unique. So on a printed comic book, you've got obviously your left-facing page, your right-facing page, and then a page turn. No one knows what's on the other side of that page till they turn the paper. those moments, those reveals are really potent. So if you can have something cool happen where a big moment happens after the right on the page turn, that something exciting and unexpected is going to happen on a page turn, that's a potent way of telling the story. Because if I'm reading the comic, I'm reading the left-hand page and something surprising happens on the right-hand page, subconsciously, my eye's already drifting over there. I know, oh, and then he dies. It's not as powerful. It's a subtle kind of shift, but if you can move into these 2-page blocks, or if you can change a scene on a page turn, it feels very natural and it feels very satisfying. It doesn't mean that that's the only method at your disposal, but it's something relatively unique to comics in that way. Like, it's not like a prose writer cares as you're reading the text that the big thing happens as you turn the page. But the visual element of comics gives us this visual punch that we can have in the process. Okay, someone's got a question down here. It says, question about editor input. Given Marvel books turn out about monthly, how far ahead are you? What type of feedback do you get to modify the story? Is it simply a nope, try again? Or is it more suggestive, like, how about you try, or something different altogether? So that's a lot of different questions, and they're all very valid ones. And there's no one answer. Some editors are much more involved in the story development process. Some of them are pretty hands-off. And I don't have any kind of bias toward or against. It just depends on the relationship you have with that editor. Some of them like to get really involved and ask a lot of questions, not even just because they want you to do a particular thing, but they want you thinking about particular things, or making sure that they understand your motivation for why you're putting different elements together. Other editors are very kind of hands-off in terms of their involvement. It's rare that an editor is going to say, nope, try again, because you've already pitched them in the initial sort of idea verbally, or in an email, I'll sort of summarize, I'm going to have this, Conan in like some sort of death trap contest, and like, oh, that could be cool. So maybe they just sort of say, oh, when you first sold this concept to me, I thought it was going to be more like this. Can we incorporate more of this? Or I feel like you're losing the theme here. You're getting caught in the details, and we're not seeing the bigger, broader kind of questions, or things like that. And the same thing is true in the scripting process. They'll come back and provide feedback, but they're not putting dialogue in my scripts. They're not telling me exactly how I must do things, or things like that. I've never really had that be the case where someone is like, you must change it this particular way. They'll make suggestions, but in the same way that I'm trying to sell them on a story concept, they are, explain to me what they need to see in a story. And it's about communication and entertainment. Okay, you've looked at a pacing document long enough. That's boring. Let's look at the real deal. Let's look at the script and see how that kind of plays out, and what is particular about the scripting process. Okay, so I'm sharing. Here we go. So here's the actual script for Conan the Barbarian 13. You've got to keep in mind, a script is a document that is generally only going to be seen by the art team and the editorial team. And so you are communicating directly with them, and hopefully imparting both knowledge and excitement for what is going to be presented on the page. And the more you're able to generate that excitement, the more you're able to get them in the headspace of what we're trying to do, the easier it's going to be to see an end result that's going to match what you hope it will be. So here, this is my first issue on a bucket list kind of run. So I say, before we start, so I say how excited I am to be this journey with all of you. Conan is one of my favorite characters, and the chance to guide the flagship comic is a dream come true. Let's rock the Hyborian Age with Days of High Adventure. It's like, boom, even in that, I'm trying to get you, as an artist, pumped. Like, I want Roj Antonio, who's drawing the series, to just like get up and cheer. Like, let's rock this thing. Let's do this. So this first page is all about celebration, and the kind of narration that is in a Conan comic is different from the way I would write Dungeons and Dragons or the Avengers or things like that. There's a very particular kind of approach. Roy Thomas set the bar for the Conan series for, over a decade. That it uses this Robert E. Howard style prose, that we can do this third person narrative that helps to summon visual moments. And I think that's part and parcel of what a Conan comic reads like to me and feels like. And I, again, don't want to write it the way, I can't write it the way Roy did, but I can try and put some of myself into that and hopefully summon that feeling. So this is the script format that I use. There is no standardized comic script format, but this one works really well. I believe Fred Van Lente might have built this one, or Greg Pak, the two of them together possibly. I think it's got a great balance of information in a dense, packed format that makes sense. The vast majority of the time, one page of script will match one page of my document, so it's really easy for me to build out. I'm trying to be as descriptive as possible and clear about what I want, but not go overboard. I probably write a little bit more descriptive than some of the writers I know. Just depends. Everyone's a little bit different. So I start with just sort of saying the expectation for the whole page. This page should be a jumble of close-ups to create a feeling of chaos. Conan is drunk and in the middle of a festival happening during the day, but the readers won't know that until the page is turned. So keep the panels all tight, claustrophobic, and a bit jumbled. Okay. Someone just asked, is there a reason you number your dialogue entries? It's both reference. It's actually important reference. So when the lettering comes in, one of the things we can do is I can, when the roughs come in from the artist, I can say, hey, line 3 is not going to fit properly here, or this isn't going to flow down the page, or I can call out particular lines for the letterer that I need altered, or we're going to insert a new piece of dialogue between 5 and 6 that wasn't there previously. So everyone knows exactly what we're talking about, that there's no confusion on that front. The letterer's got this information, and in shorthand, I don't have to say, you know, the third balloon in the 4th panel or whatever. It's just boom, number 7, this, or we're going to cut the first line here and we're going to give it to so-and-so or whatever. Some writers will bold the words they want bolded. The only thing is that depending on what font you're using and depending on how quickly the letterer is going through, I've heard from some letterers that they can miss bolds. So I underline them in my script. That's just a sort of personal choice. I find it's really clear that I'm putting an emphasis on that word, that I want that bolded in the final version. So here, I break them down specifically by caption or dialogue balloon. Some writers will just write all their text as a block and then break it up later. I just find that's an extra step I don't want to do. So it says laughter, you know, hearty, joyous, a salve for the many ills of an afflicted world. And then I go through and I describe each thing. A burly hand slammed down on a wooden table, scattering Aquilonian coins as steins of ale are being poured close by. The ale is frothy, the coins and glasses glisten. So this is, again, a little more descriptive. I'm trying to generate this kind of Robert E. Howard feeling. I'm trying to give an atmosphere, both to the line artist, to the editor, and to the colorist as well. That's one of the other key things I heard from a lot of colorists. They would say, so many writers don't indicate time of day or weather in their pages, particularly when there's new scene changes, and they will scramble looking for that stuff. God forbid they start coloring a page like it's daylight, and then they get 3 panels in and then find out the stars are twinkling because it's supposed to be a night scene or something like that. So right here, I'll say Conan is drunk in the middle of a festival happening during the day. Okay. I don't tell you whether it's sunny or overcast or things like that. I leave, you know, in this case, a little bit up, but I'm trying to be as clear as possible. So there's close-up musicians, all these different things. All the panels are called out. All the text is called out. And then away we go. So on to page 2-3. So this is the 2-page spread, big fat description, 2-page spread. We can show a lot of different stuff going on here. I'm telling you about where we are. I'm telling you about the kinds of things that are happening on the page. Some artists will literally draw every single thing you write. Some of them are just looking to get an overall feel for what kind of visuals are there, and then they'll choose what kinds of things they want to emphasize. So such is the world of high adventure, such is the life of Conan the Barbarian. And then I've got a title for the story, and then I'm not going to write all the individual credits because credits can change, so I just put credits. We're going to have that on the page. Now, for this particular series, I felt it was really important to have the title on the page. A lot of modern superhero comics will have a credits page, and that's where they'll have all their titling and credits. I love the kind of classic comic book page where the title is incorporated into the title page, that it's part of the graphic design. I feel like that's a very Conan thing too. So I specifically asked for it here, and kind of fought for it and said, this is what a Conan comic looks like, feels like to me. I'm not going to go through every page of the script, don't worry. So we go on here. Here's one of the things that's unique about this particular project, and this was a challenge that I gave myself, and it's part of the story as well. Conan doesn't speak the local language, and that's a really weird thing to do. So, and I didn't want to translate it. I want the reader to be just as confused about what's being said as Conan is. And so we generated this fake language. It's kind of Utaran in this particular part of the Hyborian world. And the characters are speaking at him really loudly and constantly. And we're selling it through body language and through situation rather than specific words. Because I'm nuts and I had too much time on my hands, I was too excited about all this stuff, I ended up generating an actual sort of like a little dictionary for myself. So I'll show it to you. It's a little bug nuts here. Let me see if I can find it. And this is above and beyond the Call of Duty. Like, most people would not do this, and I would not normally do this, but you can see this here. So this is an Excel spreadsheet. As I would create new words, I would throw them into this document so that we could consistently use them throughout the story. So whenever someone's talking about fighting, we would use this word rotuk or whatever, thriving is Teely, and sometimes I would have different versions of words. So if someone's welcoming someone in an impolite way, they would say wakta or wenda if it was a polite way, and things like that. It was a really crazy challenge that I gave myself, a little bit of extra overboard. But Conan's a dream project for me, and I just thought it'd be really cool to make some language for this Hyborian location, and it becomes part of the story because Conan is not able to understand what's being said to him in life and death situational stuff. And then there's a character in the story that he has to befriend who knows the language, and now he has to keep this kid alive because that kid can tell him what's going on in the story. It's an extra challenge, it's an extra hurdle for Conan to overcome. And it felt like something I hadn't really seen before. And so that was the thing. So these are Roja's layouts. I hope he doesn't mind me showing you these. They're great. So many artists. It's awesome. He goes in here and he does these quick thumbnails, and all the storytelling is there. This is what's so great about it. I think artists get obsessed with detail, or people assume that you jump right into detail because they think that that's the sexy, cool part of writing of drawing. But if the staging works, if the storytelling works in the broadest, simplest manner, that's good storytelling. That's good, clean, sequential pages. And so Raj does an awesome job here where he's got our opening panels. Remember, they're supposed to be claustrophobic and close and all that stuff. And he's even got panel options. So if we want to do 6 panels like this, or if we want to do these broader panels, and he's combined these 2 panels together. I'm cool with both methods. I think our editor decided we wanted the 6 stack, and works really well. Here's the big celebration. There's Conan prominently in the page. We've got a sense of perspective. Conan is higher than our eye line, so he is an epic figure in the page. He looks awesome and potent and amazing. There's a bridge. We get a sense of the architecture, so we get a feel for this part of the world that we're in. We get people celebrating in a parade and all this cool stuff going on. Like, everything is clear at this thumbnail stage. We know where we're supposed to be looking. We know what is happening. We're excited about what's to come. And this is an indulgent opening, but it's the first issue of a run. This is the time to set, the visual kind of pace. Page 4, breaking down the panels. The storytelling's really clear. I can follow through my script and look panel by panel and comment on it if needed. Hey, I think we're going to need a little bit more room of dialogue. I think this doesn't stage as well. But most of the time, particularly with a super pro like Raj, everything works. At this stage, we already know it works. And the amount of work that he's put into this is a lot less than, of course, a finished rendered page. He can thumbnail out whole sequences like this, and we can talk about them and make sure it works. This is the storyboard stage if this was animation. Is this what we want? Is this going to fit? Are these the right storytelling choices. Should we combine panels together? Should we blow out different areas of the story to present it better? Have I done a good job explaining something? I'll find out as soon as I see these thumbnails. I'll know if I've done my job or if Raj is missed out on something. These layouts are absolutely crucial. They're where the magic's happening, because that's the translation from text into visual. All the rest after this is rendering, and it's about more detail and more elaborate, drawing and coloring. But if it doesn't work here, if it doesn't work at this point, it's not going to work. It's not magically going to come together. Okay. And so don't get the wrong idea that it's just about rendering. It's so much about storytelling and structure. So here's, more of the layout 7 to 12. In some cases, Raj will send multiple versions of a sequence. Look at this big, exciting action, the dynamic quality of someone getting decked and the feeling of, oh man, that broken leg is going to hurt so bad. I can feel that right now on this loose little thumbnail, people getting choked, people getting their butts kicked. Conan, victorious. And I don't need to know, you don't need his belt or his hair or any of his detail. This is everything we need in terms of storytelling is already here. Conan's getting a medal because he's the people's champion. Everyone's cheering. Turn the corner. Uh-oh, it's a death cult. This is bad. Conan's getting mobbed. Everything that I'm describing in the script is coming through really well in the storytelling. Someone just asked a question. How strict are you in structuring action scenes? I know it comes down to how much you trust your artist. It really depends on the relationship I've got. So when I'm starting a new project with an artist I've never worked with before, I'm pretty strict. I'd rather give them more information than less. I'll tell them beat for beat, panel for panel, what's happening. Once we've been working together for a while and they kind of know my sensibilities and I know theirs, it becomes a lot easier. I can really kind of let stuff not slide, but just tell them. In some cases, like Max Dunbar, he and I have done like 4 different projects together. We're currently doing Infernal Tides for Dungeons and Dragons, a really fun comic series. I can tell that guy, fill this page with a fight, make it exciting. By the end of this person's arm is wounded and this other person's on the ground, burnt, to a crisp or whatever. And he will figure out all the action beats to get us there, as long as we've wounded them in the way that I need or put them where we need them to be. I'm cool with that. So, and some artists want that guidance. They want you to generate those kinds of moments because it's something that it helps them to visualize it. And some artists are like, let me run wild. So in some cases, I'll feel like, there's a duel between 2 characters and I'll say, use as many or as few panels as you like. By the end of it, this character has a broken leg and a whatever. In this case, the artist wasn't set yet. I don't think Raj had been chosen for the project when I was writing the script. So I wrote panel by panel, Conan's kicking this dude's, leg, breaking it, all this stuff, very, very specific, because I wanted to make sure it came across. My first script to an editor or on a new project, I'm usually writing a lot more description because I'm nervous about a new project, improving my worth and all that kind of stuff. Deeper in a run, I feel like you end up with a shorthand between you and the artist and between you and the editor. Once you're 5, 6, 10, 12 issues into it, I can call my editor up and we can have a real casual conversation. And they'd be like, yeah, I know you're going to deliver. I go, here's what's happening in the next part of the story. This is going to happen and this is going to happen. And people are going to fall in love and people are going to die and, all this stuff. We'll just have it in a conversation. And the editor will usually be like, cool. And I can jump right into a script, or I can formalize it in an email, very quickly. With a new project or with, extra approvals, I'm going through a very formalized process because that's going to be needed for them to approve it. So, not that my other way would be unprofessional, but you've built a working relationship of trust. Let's look at some real, the thumbnails are awesome, but let's look at how that comes through in the final artwork, because that's what you want to see, right? Because Raj is awesome. So here's the line art. Boom, looks amazing, right? Look at these pages. So everything that was in the thumbnail stage, dudes with glasses, pouring drinks, pounding, coins, Conan getting hammered, the celebration, the excitement, It's all here, but it was in the thumbnail stage too. And my description hopefully was exciting enough and visceral enough to generate, you know, this material. Here's the big celebration. Awesome, right? Look at this stuff. There's confetti everywhere. And I sent some reference of possible kinds of buildings. I wanted like ancient India kind of stuff. You know, animals chasing crowds of people getting hammered and playing instruments. It's all there. And this is the polish, you know, to a great page that works well. And then all that storytelling playing through, right? So here's the feat of strength that we talked about in that original pacing. These dudes lift these big rocks and put them on pillars. Dude puts a rock on top of rock. Conan's going to put a rock on top of rock on top of rock. So it's like, it's ridiculous, but it's this feat of strength that shows that he won't back down from a challenge and he's a badass. And it's a different kind of a physical challenge than just people gutting each other with swords. I wanted to sort of show there's still a playful air at this point in the story. This is still celebration. Conan, being a bodybuilding badass, is different from the death and destruction that's going to come in the latter half of the script. So we've set this light and celebratory air in the first half, and the turn in the story is going to come when Conan realizes, oh, this ain't all fun and games. This is truly dangerous and awful. And then he thinks he's so cool. What's great about this is that the storytelling works without my dialogue on it. And obviously, I want you to read all my purple prose and all that kind of stuff. But if it works here, it's going to work that much better when we get the dialogue and the colors. And there's that big page with the, you know, big busting face. And then that broken leg, right? But all of it was there in the thumbnail stage. All of it comes together. So let me show you what that finished page looks like here. Right. I've got the full color ones. So here's our finished beauty, right? So all that stuff comes into it. Laughter, hearty, joyous, a salve for the many ills of an afflicted world. Merriment can be hard to come by in these times. So here's the thing with narrative in particular, and a lot of people don't use captions or narration as much as they used to. That was more a throwback in terms of the kind of narration that happens in you know, the old Conan comics. But you can have you're describing what's happening in the scene, or you can have narrative that kind of plays the opposite of what's happening. So it says here, you know, a violent need to try and drink the world dry with it before it drowns you with its sorrow. These moments are precious, fleeting, but so is life, especially a life like this, one of gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirth. That's a throwback to a very famous Robert E. Howard quote in the original Conan prose, where they say that Conan is a Cimmerian with gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirth. So I wanted to really evoke that kind of classic feel, the people's champion. So again, we got that big title incorporated right into the thing. Here we've got the singing and cheering in the local language, all the characters speaking here. I like this. So she's speaking in that fictional language. I don't speak your language, dancer, but I doubt the message you're sending needs much translation, right? So this was the kind of fun thing, is you've got Conan interacting and engaging with all these characters. They're all speaking a foreign language, but we're getting a sense of why this is happening in the context of each of it. But there is an internal logic to the language that I created. And on they go. So let me show you deeper into the story. It's super fun. We had such a good time. And we get to show Conan being a badass in this bar brawl instead of just swords and killing monsters. All that's going to come in future chapters, obviously. So then Conan beats this guy's brains in on the thing. Boom. So they're calling him the Gala Grotan, which is basically the great champion. And even if you didn't know what those words mean, clearly these people are exciting. They're excited about Conan being victorious. They're really pumped about, him kicking ass. And then, so this is where Conan meets Delian, who's this kid. So he says, more babbling. I'll assume it's something good. He said, well done, great champion. So here, if you're paying close attention to the story, he says, Alwenda Gala Grotan, right? Great champion. So here they say great, great champion. So if you're following along, and I don't assume that readers are, you could start to break down what certain words mean and when they're being used in the story, which is sort of an extra layer if people are interested. So he says, well done, great champion. You speak both languages, boy, and then onward they go. Conan, this is the big turn. They give him the medal. They feel like, hey, do I have to do a parade? Am I going to be lifting rocks? And they go, no. Page turn. Boom. Uh-oh. We got a real problem here. It's a death pit. It's bad news. And everything starts to fall apart on the story. And so now we've brought you in with this mirth and this joyous kind of fun and bubbling kind of craziness of the story. And now things are taking this dark turn. Conan's getting tossed into the pit. And now we use the similar pacing of the narration. So at the start, we said laughter, a salve for the ills of the world. Now we say laughter, heartless, cruel, a crowd of zealots too caught up in their madness to feel anything but the bloodlust of their ancient ways. Conan swears to his god of the mountaintop, this will not be how his life ends. And he grabs the kid and drags him down with him. Boom. And so the story plays out from there. It's this death contest. We've got all these cool other contestants that are pulled into it with Conan and Delian. They have to figure out what the rules are. They have to figure out where they're going and how they're going to survive. And so from an initial plot building point all the way through to execution, I have to figure out how the story is going to play out, how I can pull you along and evoke certain emotions in you that you think one thing is happening and then twisting on another aspect of it, or that you are expecting Conan to do one thing and he does something else, but I justify it in cool and exciting ways in the story if we do our job well. I'm incredibly proud of what we've been able to put together. I think our crew is all very, very driven and excited about this character and about the potential and where we can take it, in the months to come. Working on Conan the Barbarian and writing for Marvel is such a joy and something that I've always wanted to do since I was a kid. And now that I'm doing it, trying to execute on that on every level and just be at the best I can be. Working in the comic business and being able to tell stories for a living is a joy. I know all of us, just can't wait to get back to, some sense of normalcy in terms of delivering what we do and what we love to do. This whole weekend, this event that we're running, today is to support Canadian comic book retailers. I hope that you found this presentation that I did here useful, give you a peek behind the curtain, how this stuff works and the step-by-step kind of process. If you are a laxed, comic book fan, please support your local retailers, support Canadian retailers and wherever you're coming from, buy comics, share great comics with other people. In this case, we are asking people to make donations to what's called the Comic Legends Legal Defense Fund, the CLLDF. You can go to clldf.ca and make a donation there, and that will go towards retailers who are struggling through these crazy times. If you've always wanted to write comic book stuff, please do so, like make stories and get involved. You don't have to be writing for a publisher to make comics. And I feel like a lot of times people hold themselves back from doing creative things because they feel like they need someone to approve it or justify, what they're doing and why. And that's not the case. You can make stuff. I started off doing a web comic in my spare time back in 2001. I published my first book in 2006. I got my first paid writing gig in 2007. I started doing my own image book in 2009 and then started doing work regularly for Marvel like 2014. So you're talking about like a 12-year journey for me. Everyone's different. There's no, particular or time or thing how that's going to work. If you haven't done comic writing before and you want some extra resources, this is my website here. It's called Zubtales. It's just jimzub.com. And if you scroll down here, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a whole section called tutorials. So I've got like 40 different articles about how to write comic books, how scripts are put together. Lots of examples from my own work that you can check out and hopefully find useful across the board. Otherwise, I've also got a Patreon, and that's like a, I should probably log in. Dun, dun, dun. Thankfully, you will not see my password. This is my Patreon page where I've got like an archive of my scripts. If you want to see how I put together material, I've got over 200 scripts here that you can dig through and compare to the finished published versions. So I hope you guys find this stuff useful. I hope you dig in and write your own stories. And whether you're a planner or you're writing by your seat of your pants, that you get creative and collaborate with other people. Thank you for being here, letting me blather for an hour. Stay in touch. Drop me a line on Twitter or on Facebook or anywhere else, and let me know what you're reading. All right.